Rhinos can run at speeds of up to 30 miles per hour. They are not something you want to get in the way of, but that's exactly what happened to a zookeeper in Austria, as she found herself trapped between the mighty force of a rhino and the metal bars of her enclosure. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. In September 2023, two zookeepers headed to Hellbrunn Zoo in the western Austrian city of Salzburg. They were husband and wife and had worked there for many years, tending to the large variety of animals housed on its grounds. Situated on a 14,000-hectare site in the gardens of Hellbrunn Palace, the 1,500 animals draw in around 400,000 visitors a year. Among these animals are a small herd of white rhinos, 1 male and 3 females. The rhinos have lived at the zoo for many years and were used to the routines in place for them. They had never shown any signs of aggression toward the zoo staff and were so well trained that they would happily come trotting into the rhino house when their name was called for a health check or veterinary procedure. Working with them was straightforward for many years. The safety procedures and protocols in place had always protected both the animals and staff, and there was a high degree of animal welfare at the very heart of the zoo. But something went wrong early on Tuesday, September 12th. As the male zookeeper who had been working there since 2008 went to feed the rhinos, his wife, who had worked there since 2014, was assigned a special task that day. She was required to put insect repellent on one of the rhinos' bodies, who was very sensitive to insect bites. As the temperature soared that September, the biting insects were out in the thousands, and the bites irritated and stressed one rhino in particular, whose skin reacted to them more than the others. Her name was Yeti. Just before 7 a.m., the keepers conducted their routine procedures. Before the zoo opened its gates to the paying public, the staff was required to clean the animals' enclosures, put down fresh bedding, sweep the indoor areas, feed and water them. Any medicinal treatment was also performed early in the morning, before the general public was allowed inside. The two keepers headed over to the rhino enclosure. It was something they had done many times before. It was part of their job, and they were both highly experienced at carrying out the animal husbandry duties required each day. The rhinos were inside their house, locked up for the night. They had access to hay and water and space to walk around. Then, during the day, the doors were opened up for them to gain access to their paddock. It was an outdoor area with grass and mud, trees and logs lying across the ground. It was surrounded by a low-lying stone wall, allowing the visitors to view them safely, relatively closely from just the other side. Yeti was a 30-year-old white rhino and had been at the zoo for a long time. She had arrived 14 years earlier in 2009. She knew the keepers, and they knew her. She was very cooperative with them and was never observed to be boisterous. She was familiar with the daily routines. She often took on the role of aunt to the younger animals, as she had a caring and nurturing personality. She herself gave birth to a calf in 2015. In the wild, rhinos can live in groups of 5 or 6 individuals, rarely with more than one male, as the males are generally solitary. Sometimes rhinos will form loose bonds with 10 or more individuals that may or may not be related. Calves will spend up to 3 years with their mothers and will continue to nurse from their mothers for up to 2 years. The mother and young form tight social bonds, and she is incredibly protective of her offspring. The female keeper was a 33-year-old German citizen from Bavaria and was well versed in animal husbandry. She had a kind and caring way with the animals and a unique instinct when it came to working closely with them. She was by no means inexperienced, but that morning, just before 7 a.m., she didn't know that it would be her last shift at the zoo. She walked into the rhino house and separated Yeti from the rest of the rhinos. The rhino obediently followed her commands and walked into a separate pen so that insect repellent could be applied safely. But when the female employee stepped inside the enclosure, Yeti became agitated. There was no time to react. The enormous rhino, weighing in excess of 1.8 tons, suddenly turned head-on to the zookeeper and launched an attack. She let out a deep rumble, a low guttural snort, as she prepared to charge. As time seemed to stand still, the keeper could see the rhino's tiny eyes on the side of her massive, bulky head. Her ears were tilted forward and her two horns were lower to the ground. Then she ran at the keeper without warning. She covered the ground in a second, her huge frame thundering toward the woman. There was no bluff charge. It happened in a split second, and the front of her horn and her powerful head rammed the zookeeper, who let out a cry of alarm at the impact. Her husband, who was just yards away filling the racks with hay, turned to look over at his wife. He was shocked to see her being crushed by the female rhino as it pressed her up against the thick steel bars. There was no way for her to escape. She was pinned against the fence. The weight of the rhino crushed the woman's chest, compressing it so powerfully that the wind was knocked from her lungs. Her ribs were cracked, and her heart gave out. There was no surviving a head-on collision like that. Although working with these enormous wild animals is dangerous, for the rhino's behavior to have suddenly changed was highly unusual. The male keeper immediately radioed through for assistance before jumping into the enclosure to try and scare the rhino away. Staff and colleagues responded to his emergency call and raced toward the rhino house. As the male keeper tried to distract the rhino, Yeti didn't budge. She was in attack mode, and for some reason, she didn't respond to the commands he shouted at her. Something or someone had enraged her, and she acted in a way never before seen by the zoo. She had become unpredictable, using her strength and power to stop anyone in her path. As the man raised his arms, clapped his hands, and shouted at her to get her to back away from his fallen wife, she turned and ran at him. He tried to duck out of the way, but the enormous rhino, not known for her agility, managed to plow straight into it. She lowered her head and drove herself forward. The enclosure was small, so there was no time to build up speed, but when she connected with the man, he was sent flying through the air. The power of the attack was a shock, and he landed on the concrete ground with a heavy thud. He felt his leg crack under the weight of the huge rhinoceros. Mercifully, backup arrived, and a team of staff were able to move Yeti and get her safely away from the married couple. The man was rushed to the hospital via helicopter with severe injuries, including a broken leg. He survived the attack. Everyone at the zoo was shocked by the incident, and the zoo was immediately closed to the public. The setup for that rhino enclosure has been in operation for more than 30 years without incident, and all safety procedures had been effective up until then. They tried to work out what had caused the rhino to act so out of character and set up an investigation to find some answers. The zoo concluded that they would be re-evaluating their safety protocols thoroughly to try and establish exactly what went wrong. But re-evaluating the safety procedures wasn't going to bring the woman back.